Hey everybody, welcome back to Vanta EDC, and today we'll be doing my 1 month review after carrying the Pro-Tech Malibu. And this is the textured handles with a reverse Tanto blade, whatever, with the black DLC. And this is in 20 CV, as you can see right there. So if you saw my initial impressions of this knife, this might be redundant, but yeah, I mean, the reason I got this knife to begin with and ended up keeping it for so long and letting it sit in a safe was because this is the standard button lock design. This is kind of the gold standard at the moment, and it really started the whole craze. And you know, I've appreciated button lock designs. This was the first button lock I got, the City Altus. This is the second one I got, the Pyrite. You'll notice all of these are button locks, and they're here for obvious reason, just kind of for some comparison purposes. But yeah, basically, I had got to experience these budget button locks, which are great. You know, especially for the money you're paying, you cannot complain. And so, you know, the difference is though that, I mean, these are budget tier and they're made with steel liners and G10 scales and, you know, kind of lower end steels, or mid-tier steels I should say, maybe, versus this is aluminum handles, 20 CV, and it's Pro-Tech. It's American brand. They're known for their production quality and whatnot. So yeah, you know, the reputation of Pro-Tech, and in particular the reputation of this knife, made me want to finally try this as an actual EDC knife, just to see what benefits, you know, I could get compared to these budget button locks, which are great knives. Again, I have only mainly and largely good things to say about those knives. This is one of my favorite EDC knives, probably the one I'd most highly recommend to anybody who's looking to just get started in knives for, like, you know, under $100, and I mean $50 literally. Great deal. But yeah, so kind of in the vein of, you know, Pro-Tech's reputation, you know, some of the biggest strengths of this knife are the fit and finish, so to speak, in the sense that the tolerances are very tight. You know, when it came out of the box, the coating, the milling, no major flaws. The only real flaw, so to speak, was just this uneven edge bevel right here, which, you know, is not like a deal breaker at all for me personally, unless it's like egregious. But I know for some people, they have higher standards for, you know, when you're paying essentially after tax, you know, just over $300 for this model in particular. So yeah, but this action is very smooth. You can kind of hear the friction there, but it's when you're, you know, just letting it swing freely like that. But and then you know, kind of in relation to the tight tolerances, I mean, this does not want to give the way that these knives would give a little bit side to side. I think that's one of the biggest strong suits of this design, actually, is not just how fidgety and smooth it is, but actually how strong of a design strong the geometry and whatnot are. So yeah, and on top of that, it's just a very natural knife to deploy, to handle. You know, it's kind of this somewhat neutral grip profile, so it lends itself well to just, you know, carrying it and to using it. So yeah, I'll go over the small details about this knife that I like in particular. And you'll notice now that, you know, probably should have said this earlier, you know, there's some scuffing here on the DLC, or I don't know if this is anodized or DLC, the handles. I know the blade is DLC, but I don't know about the handles. But you know, I've dropped this a few times in gravel. I'm not proud of it, but it's happened, and it's not terribly you know, it's not terribly gashed up. You know, benefits of DLC, I think, compared to just paint or whatnot. So anyway, small details that I like. You know, for the model as a whole, the Malibu as a model, I like how minimalist the design is. I like how kind of in the vein of what I said earlier, is kind of the neutral-ish ergonomics and profile of the handle and the blade. It's not too busy for sure, and so I like that. I'm more of I prefer minimalist design. That's my preference in design language, not just in knives, but in general. So I appreciate that, you know, and kind of in that vein, I like that the branding that Pro-Tech does for the Malibu is along the spine there, both the brand name and then the steel, rather than having it, you know, billboarded across the flat or whatnot somewhere on the sides of the blade. I really appreciate that. I like this blade shape. You can get the Malibu in a their version of Warncliffe, or the reverse Tanto. I like this, I think, over the Wharncliffe. I think the lines, because I mean the Wharncliffe is basically just literally just round that off, and you have the Wharncliffe version of the Malibu, so it's not a huge difference in some ways, but I like the angularity of that because I do like having some sharp lines on my knives, and so I think this gives it a little more of a sharpness than the, no pun intended, than the Wharncliffe shape does. Another detail I like, you'll notice that notice how there's no texturing right here, and there's these three distinct grooves, or whatever you want to call it, kind of indentations, which are also slightly chamfered at an angle. I don't think I'll be able to catch it super. Yeah, you can kind of catch it there on the camera, but basically they round it off there rather than it just being a hard 90-degree angle from the front of the handle to the side of the scale. And so I like that because it does add a little bit to the how well your hand kind of, you know, interacts with the scales, with the handle of the knife in general. So I appreciate that they do that. They, you know, even though they're texturing everything else, that they kind of smooth that out here and make them slightly angled. So yeah, I also like that the flipper itself is textured. You know, you see all these patches? That's all accumulation of dead skin. I'm like 90% certain. So it's definitely the serrations, the jimping on the, or texturing, whatever you call it, on the flipper is definitely grippy. You know, when for the first few days that I was just flipping this thing nonstop, basically fidgeting with it nonstop, it definitely accumulated that quickly, and it took a while for my index finger to get used to just constantly going for it. So it's probably a good deterrent so that you don't over fidget with your knife in a way. So another detail is this is not a true backspacer, but this is this thing that looks like a backspacer here, is that's two halves that are attached, that are part of the scale itself. Like they're not screwed in to the scale and then interface with one another, but they're part of the scales equally. You might be able to, like, you see the seam here, that seam runs all the way down there. Yeah, you can see it better there. And so basically that yeah, I like that it's kind of part of the scales. You know, it definitely adds to the overall strength and integrity of the design. Yeah. Another thing I like that kind of going back to where I was pointing earlier, this is the lanyard hole right here. It kind of goes through here. Can you see the hole? It's kind of hard to see the hole, but basically, yeah, right there, kind of. Yeah. You can see my skin popping through there. So it's basically this little, like, you know, it's very subtle. It doesn't at all get priority over the clip, which I appreciate because I'm not a lanyard guy personally. No, I have no hard feelings, unlike some YouTubers, against guys with lanyards, but it's just not something I need on my knives at this time. So yeah, I appreciate that. It's a subtle thing. It's done well. You know, doesn't take priority over the clip design. Now, the feel in hand, I think it's not an amazing aspect of it, but it's definitely good. Again, as I mentioned before, it's very open, so it's not confining. Even this finger choil here is not super deep, so it's not like forcing you to be in there. And, you know, if you have thicker fingers than me, which, you know, I'm sure some of you do, it's not gonna, like, this point is not so, it's not so sharp that like me putting pressure down and trying to go across this is not like super uncomfortable. So I think that's to the benefit of people with varying hand sizes. Another thing, I have multiple textured Pro-Techs. I mean, I can show off this one a little bit later, but they generally, all the ones that I have, they do a good job about leaving the patch that the clip comes in direct contact to the scale with smooth, so that it's not creating additional friction sliding in and out of the pocket. So I appreciate that. Now, I will say, one of my issues with this knife, I guess this is a good kind of transition. I have a few issues with this knife. Not many, and not major ones, but one of them is, in a way, I don't know if I think it must be the coating that they coat these clips with, but there's still so much friction when I do, or it's also probably the tension. I should probably say that. That's probably the major contributor, but like, yeah, this knife in particular does not want to slip in and out of my pocket easily, which some people probably like because then they're not as worried about it slipping out on accident. But for me, I'd rather have it be a little more, you know, a little more fluid, and like I can hear kind of the friction between the clip and my pants whenever I'm pulling them in and out. So it definitely requires a lot more forcefulness than I'm used to with a lot of other designs, like these ones with these, you know, these, what do you call them? Bent steel clips, whatnot. So yeah, I have bent it out a little bit. You know, I've done this business a few times, so I think that's helped a tiny amount, but oh, my dead skin's caught with the texturing. Not a good look. But yeah, I have done that a few times, but I haven't like taken the clip off to fully try that. I haven't even disassembled this knife yet, so I'm not looking to do that. I'll do that when I need to, but anyway. Yeah, so another issue that I have, I mean, I've mentioned it already, is the edge bevel not being uniform. I mean, when you're paying $300, I feel like it's totally fair to expect a like a 90 to 95% symmetrical blade grind. Blade edge grind. So this is not great, Pro-Tech. I mean, and I've had I think my Mordax, this 1 of 100 Mordax also. I mean, I think it's not as egregious on this one, but it's definitely also not that, like, there's definitely noticeable variance. It is not perfectly consistent. So, you know, to err is human, but at the same time, we're paying a lot of money for this, so you can decide how much of the big deal you want to make about that. So, and then I think the thing that most people, and this somewhat common issue that I've heard of with the Malibu, is the button stick. So it's, long story short, when I first got it and started using it, the button stick was a lot more evident and a lot stronger. It has smoothed out somewhat, so I'll let you hear. So I'm about to depress it. So you can hear it disengaging, which in a way is good. So in some ways, I don't think this is an objective issue, because I think it was intentional, because having that tight of tolerances between the plunger and the tang of the blade where the plunger locks up with, it creates this amount of this lockup, which is, I'm not going to get that off this. Like, I can definitely, it's not very audible, but there's a lot more side to side wiggle there, and there's a lot more wiggle in my Altus. So that could be, with the Altus, it could be partially because I have disassembled it a few times and whatnot, but you know, it's pretty centered and whatnot, and there is that wiggle still. So this has much more solid lockup, and I think that's in part due because of the tight tolerances between the plunger and the tang of the blade, and so that's just a give and take in my mind. So yeah, but it has smoothed out some, so I'm glad about that. Now, there's a lot of things I would change. I think this is a great design, but for my own personal preferences, and I think in part more so just more broader considerations that I generally think people could appreciate, there's a lot of things I would change. I think the biggest, so I'm kind of torn on this now that I've kind of flip-flop on this one. So this is fairly thick blade stock, and it's a fairly short blade. It's not super tall. And notice that the flat is comes down pretty far down. So like there's not much distance between the edge and the end of the primary bevel. And so with it being such a thick blade, this is not the sliciest blade, not by a long shot. Now, it's not to say that it's like a brick that just, you know, stands still, but you know, I'm torn between whether or not I would consider this a hard use button lock or a very just general light EDC button lock. I think because of the lockup, you could treat this as a hard use button lock. But because it's a button lock too, I think a lot of people would prefer other lock designs for a hard use knife. So in some ways, they might just never consider a button lock a qualified hard use knife. Now, depending on where you fall on that side of that argument, on which side of that argument, you know, if you think of it as a hard use knife, then this is great. You know, like there's a lot of material behind the blade. Even at the tip, it's not super thin. There's still a decent amount of material there. And so, you know, I would not be worried about this, you know, not being able to push through stuff in a way. Now, if you fall on the more like this is a light EDC type knife, it's a button lock, why would you, you know, do any hard work with this? I think this could benefit from a really nice high hollow grind, like even maybe a full hollow grind, because I'm sure Pro-Tech could pull that off. You know, it's just a matter of them deciding whether or not they think that's a good idea. But I think this would be super slicey if you got a full hollow grind on this with this blade height. I think that would be awesome. So, at the end of the day, that comes down to preference in a way. Now, I do think, I think it's, it'd be hard to argue otherwise that a lot of people like button locks because they're fidgety. And what makes knives more fidgety is having more than one deployment method, and this only has a flipper. So, as it stands now, with the handle profile as it stands, you couldn't really fit a thumb stud, or even, I mean, maybe you could fit a thumb disc, but you don't really have good access because of, right now, again, like how shallow this choil is, and also how thick it is, and there's not much ramping in the choil as of yet. But I think if Pro-Tech were to, if they were to redesign this, or someone were to design a very similar knife, if you just deepened this a little bit and then added a thumb stud, man, this would be a fidget freak. Which, some people think is stupid, but I enjoy knives partially because of how fidgety I can get with them. So, flipper, definitely less options than these thumb stud button locks, where I can at least do thumb flick, reverse flick, all the day long. So, yeah, that comes down to preference. So this thing I would change personally. Now, I mentioned I haven't disassembled this. I think this is a free spinning pivot. If it is, then I would change this to a captive pivot. It doesn't take much to just create some internal, like Civivi does it on all, and we, I think, do it on all their knives. And obviously you can get their knives for a lot cheaper. So I don't think that would take much extra engineering to design a captive pivot, either internally or just externally. But I could be wrong. So if I'm wrong, apologies. No, I have no intention on, unnecessarily insulting companies or anything like that, people, designers. So yeah, I think another personal preference thing for me is, if you've watched a lot of my reviews, think on a lot of knives that don't have it, I would basically on all knives, I want a finger choil. Especially, so this is, I think, a 3.1/4 inch long blade. So this is longer than the Pyrite, or the Altus, sorry. The Altus, which I think is just about a 3-inch blade. So it's not like, in the grand scheme of things, not crazy longer. But especially when you get longer, I think it's always good to have the option to choke up on the knife, and therefore choke up with a finger choil. And I can't do that. I really want to do that with this knife. And that could just be a me thing. I don't know how many people feel the same way, but that's something I would really want. So, another thing is, I think, especially if you consider this a hard use knife, I think jimping is an obvious miss here. I think that would really, make a more convincing case to use this for, harder tasks. But, again, that could just be preferential at the end of the day. Now, I've talked about the friction from the clip. Maybe it's just the tension. Maybe it's the DLC coat. Like, the DLC coating feels chalky. So maybe it's a matter of, if they were to make this like a not DLC on like some Anno or something, maybe it'd be smoother. I can't say for certain. I'm no authority on clips, but yeah, it could just be a matter of how much tension they design into this clip from the get-go, and which is, easy personal fix if you want to. So I'm not gonna make too many bones about that. The texture pattern, I've talked about this several times because I also have another knife with this texture pattern, which I have not shown on the channel yet, but you will see it sometime soon. But this texture pattern, very functional, and for that, that, to me, that's the most important part about texture. It should be functional. It should add traction, add friction, such that you're less likely to slip off the knife when you're holding onto it, especially when you're doing something that you're worried that there's actually the potential of you slipping off of it. But I think aesthetically it's just kind of blah, and the fact that it's all over and not more selective, like not just on the parts where your fingers really are coming into contact. Like I don't need texturing up here. I don't need it up here. I like creating the faux bolster look that they do with like the Mordax, for example, with this honeycomb milling. So yeah, that is a preferential thing personally. I don't love the pattern itself, and I don't love, like, in terms of the look, and I don't love how it's just all across the whole scales, but it's not the end of the world. And then the final thing that I would change is, I think they could probably get away with, so this is, I think the knife is under 3.5 ounces. I can't remember off the top of my head. Let's see if I can pull that up real quick. How much does this weigh? This weighs 2. So it's 3 ounces. It's 2.99 ounces according to Blade HQ. So it's not heavy. You know, it's certainly not heavy, but you could lighten this up. And again, that might be an intentional design choice, like no internal milling, because they wanted to have that much more strength in it and rigidity. But you know, in a way, I think my review of this knife is, I'm not sure what the philosophy of use from the designer's end is, and I'm conflicted on how I want to treat it because it's kind of ambiguous. Is this more of a light EDC knife, or is this a hard use knife? Now, my guess is that Pro-Tech, because they do a lot of autos, and they're very, like, honestly, a lot of their autos are geared, well, I guess it's not all of them, but like they literally have a line, the tactical response line, TR3, TR4, TR5, right? Those knives are very obviously meant for hard use, you know, tactical use. So it kind of feels like, in a way, the Malibu is the button, like a non-auto version, non-auto knife to kind of fit a similar ethos there, but who knows? At the end of the day, we can talk to Dave Wattenberg about that. So, yeah, lots of things I would change, but at the end of the day, it's still a good knife. So I put these knives on screen because I do want to briefly touch on, this is not a comparison video, but I do want to touch on some general comparisons, because as I mentioned at the beginning, the reason I bought this knife and ended up deciding to actually carry it, not just keep it in a safe and or eventually sell it, was because I wanted to see how, you know, budget versus more premium and you know, G10 versus aluminum, how that stacks up. And so definitely compared to these budget ones, the Malibu and the Mordax, to different degrees, are, you know, there's tighter tolerances. Like, you can just kind of, it's kind of a semi-subjective feeling, not purely subjective, but semi-subjective feeling of like, oh, and maybe it is like somewhat, what do you call it, placebo effect of like, oh, Pro-Tech is a higher quality American brand, and so it feels like it's better made and whatnot. But I do think there's something to, like, especially with the amount of lockup, how tight the lockup is compared to these budget knives, that makes me feel a lot more confident in saying that, you know, the just the precision and the design that Pro-Tech puts into their knife designs and the execution, the actual production of it, makes me, you know, think of it as a more premium knife at the end of the day. You know, and at the end of the day, I think also, and this is personal, a very personal specific thing, but like, I like the aesthetic overall of the Malibu compared to these designs. Not to say that these are ugly designs, they're not ugly. I think the lines flow in a way that is more appealing to me. Now, you may agree, you may completely disagree. You may feel like the Pyrite is a more handsome, whatever, sexy, whatever you want to call it, knife. And I wouldn't honestly hold that against you, but it is different, you know? Like, I mean, the blade shape is different. There's lots of differences there. So, you know, it's kind of a pick your poison thing. And, you know, we live in a world where we have the luxury of choice. So, yeah. You know, I think this is a good size knife. It is a tiny bit larger than I personally need, because I don't need a blade larger than 3 inches. It's 3 1/4 inches, but, you know, it's not an excessively large knife, I don't think, by anyone's standards, unless you're a child. So yeah, but you should not be handing these to a child, at least not readily. So yeah, it's a good size, but a tad bit large. Compared to, like, these are really good EDC size. Like, this is a little bit bigger, and these are a little bit smaller than the Malibu, and so the Malibu kind of is somewhat in the middle ground, basically. Now, at the end, one thing that still remains to be seen for me personally is how this and the Mordax, how these two, and I'm going to be doing a separate video comparing specifically these two models, and I'm also going to do a separate video comparing budget versus premiums in more depth, if that's something that you're interested in. So yeah, but I want to see how these two, which are both aluminum scaled button locks, I want to see, man, that's fun being able to deploy them both at the same time. Nice thwack. I want to see how these compare to titanium frame button lock, or titanium scale button locks, which unfortunately there's very few production models I'm aware of that are in titanium. I know there's some out there, but none of them currently really catch my eye. Now, there are a couple out there that are coming down the pipe, which I'm very interested in, and one of them comes from the Italian brand MKM, I think it's Maniago knife makers. It's called the Miura, M-I-U-R-A. That's supposed to be coming sometime soon. Check Blade HQ. You can see on the coming soon page that it's coming. I like the aesthetic of that. It's a little tiny, but I like the aesthetic. I like the fact that it's a titanium button lock, and that one actually happens to be an integral, and that's really shocking because there's only one other integral button lock design I'm aware of, and it's a very smaller production model. So anyway, so yeah, I'm really excited. And then there's if you go to Ferrum Forge, their website, they have an upcoming design they say that's coming out this year, and I actually have been communicating with them via email. They have a titanium frame Stinger, if you know that model from them, a titanium frame Stinger, and I'm really excited to try that one out because that checks a lot of boxes for my theoretical ideal EDC knife. So yeah, I'm really excited for that one. So anyway, soon enough we'll be able to compare, these steel liner G10 scale button locks to these aluminum Pro-Techs to these titanium button locks. And so I'm really excited to have that full scope, so to speak, of materials and manufacturing quality to compare. So just gonna the last bit that I'll say is this is a long video. If you're sticking through it, great for you. The last thing I'll say is my plans for this. I'll keep using this somewhat regularly. There's a lot of other knives that I enjoy carrying a little more than this. Yeah, like honestly, I think I enjoy carrying this more in a way. It's a more satisfying, and it's funny because all these things I say, it's like I like a smaller knife. This is the opposite of that, but in a way, it's like more satisfying to carry because of that. So, and yeah, I like aesthetically, I like this more, but yeah, I'll still carry this on occasion. There's the chance that I want to use this to do a lot of custom work on, to actually make some of the changes that I mentioned earlier in this video. So don't be surprised if that happens, but also don't be surprised if, maybe I'll sell this before I do custom work, because if I'm able to get, right now, Pro-Tech has been releasing magnet cut versions of the Malibu. Right now, they've been really only doing Warncliffe shape as far as I can remember. But if they do a when they do a reverse tanto in magnet cut, and maybe honestly with titanium versus the aluminum, then this will probably go if I get one of those. So it could go either way. I could keep it and get it worked on, or I could get just a nicer one when it comes out, or like a one in magnet cut instead of 20 CV and whatnot. So yeah, this is the Malibu. That's my 1 month experience with it. I did carry it a lot, especially like the first 2 weeks. I think I carried it almost every day, basically. Got a decent amount of use out of it. It performs, and it's fun, and it is a lot of what people say it is, at least in my experience. But it's also not a quote unquote perfect knife. It's not my perfect knife for sure, but it's great still. So if you're on the fence, it's definitely worth giving it a shot, and it's definitely a resellable knife. So it's not going to be too hard to sell it if you don't love it. So yeah, tell me if you've used a Malibu for any significant amount of time. Feel free to chime in with your own experiences. If you have questions, having not handled one, hopefully this video will give you a lot more information than you had before. And if it didn't answer certain questions you have, feel free to ask them. So thanks for your time. If you stuck through the whole thing, kudos to you. Thank you for being willing to listen to me blather on about my knives. But yeah, I'll see you next time. Take care.